I'm Harper. If someone ever asked me how does it feel to be invisible to your own family, I wouldn't know how to answer. Not because I haven't lived it, but because when it happens throughout your entire childhood, it becomes part of the air you breathe. You stop realizing it's wrong or painful. It just exists. I was born in Austin, Texas, into a family of 3 children. My eldest brother, Mason, the type who could turn every head in the room with just a smile. My second brother, Carter, the school's golden athlete, whose every goal was celebrated by my father, Douglas, as if it were a legacy for the entire family. And me? I'm Harper, the youngest daughter they all casually called the girl who doodles nonsense. My father wasn't the yelling type. On the contrary, he was always polite, calm, even too calm. But that very silence was what hurt the most. I still remember vividly the time I won first place in the city's art competition at 12. I had spent an entire week finishing that painting, trembling with excitement as I brought home my certificate to show him. And his reaction? A bland nod, his eyes never leaving the TV screen where Mason was playing soccer. No congratulations, no hug. He didn't even glance at my painting. 10 minutes later, Carter came home from the field, holding a bronze trophy from a small local tournament. My father instantly stood up, took the trophy as if it were a priceless gem, clapped Carter on the back, beaming. "That's my boy." The whole house seemed to light up with his victory, while I stood there, clutching my now crumpled certificate. I wasn't the type of child who whined or caused a scene, but the way my father reserved all his pride for Mason and Carter while giving me nothing but cold nods left a deep, lingering scar. For the first time, I asked myself, how much harder do I have to try for him to see me? Mason was always the #1 pride. From debate club president to founding a small startup in college, everything he touched was praised by my father as if he were the sole genius of the family. Carter, though sometimes reckless, only needed a well-timed goal or a photo on the local paper's front page to earn endless bragging rights at every family gathering. And me? I tried everything. Literature clubs, art classes, even community service projects. I earned an honors scholarship at 16, started an art initiative for disabled children by myself. But to my father, all of that was nothing more than girls' little hobbies. Last once, I mustered the courage to ask him for money to buy professional art supplies for my project. He looked up from his newspaper just long enough to say, "Harper, you know those kinds of hobbies won't feed you. Be realistic." That sentence cut straight through my self-esteem like a razor-sharp blade. Worse than the rejection was his expression. Not angry, not disdainful, just indifferent. As if I wasn't even there. Family dinners became the familiar stage for my 2 brothers to shine. My father would ask them about their big plans, their promising opportunities. I sat there quietly, like a misplaced decoration on the table. Every time I tried to speak, he would give a faint smile and steer the conversation elsewhere, as if my words were background noise not worth hearing. The older I got, the clearer it became. In my father's eyes, I was the dull child who would eventually quit everything I started. No one said it out loud, but sometimes silence weighs heavier than any insult. From that silence, something different began to stir inside me. It wasn't sadness anymore, not the aching need to be seen. It was quieter, heavier, like a slow ember taking hold, biding its time. I couldn't define it back then, but deep down, I made myself a promise. One day, he would look at me, not with detached indifference, but with a recognition so real he couldn't look away. I made that vow at 17, on a night spent alone with nothing but the scratch of my pencil and a wobbly old desk for company. That same day, my father had proudly taken Mason to meet an investor. Carter's latest win was celebrated with cheers on the soccer field. And me? I stayed home, sketching lines that cut deeper than any words spoken in that house. My lips curved, not out of innocence, but with the quiet resolve of someone who had stopped hoping and started preparing. I used to think that if I tried hard enough, one day my father would be proud of me. When I was 18, while my friends flaunted their summer trips and prom dresses, I quietly took a part-time job at an old bookstore on South Congress. Every penny I saved went into evening art classes. I wanted to hold in my hand something undeniable, a success so solid he couldn't look away. I earned a full scholarship to Parsons School of Design, something that up until then only existed in fairy tales about other people's kids. The day I received my acceptance letter, I rushed home, paint stains still on my hands, heart pounding. My father was in the living room, eyes glued to Carter's basketball game on TV. I stood before him, my voice trembling with anticipation. "Dad, I got a full scholarship to Parsons, in New York, one of the top design schools." He looked away from the screen for exactly 3 seconds, only to deliver a dry response. "That career? Does it actually pay the bills? Don't dream too big, Harper. You're not Mason." I heard every word, like shards of glass shattering inside my chest. A few days later, Mason announced he'd landed a summer internship at some small startup. Nothing fancy, just event coordination support. Yet the whole family buzzed with excitement, throwing a backyard barbecue to celebrate his career milestone. My mother, Lorraine, gently pulled me into the kitchen, pressing an old, worn apron into my hands. "Harper, I know you're talented. But you understand, your father, he shows things differently. Don't let it get to you, okay?" Her voice was soft, her eyes filled with quiet sympathy. But I knew the truth. She was trying to keep the house in order, even if that order was built on blatant unfairness. I silently washed each plate of vegetables, listening to Mason's laughter echo from the backyard, where Dad was enthusiastically discussing the brilliant future of the Evans' eldest son. And me? I was just Harper, the girl in the kitchen of her own home, holding a full-ride scholarship that was treated like a crumpled piece of scrap paper. Carter wasn't any less exceptional in Dad's eyes. The time he was named Player of the Week in a school basketball league, Dad didn't hesitate to rent an entire court to throw a congratulatory party. I stood on the sidelines, snapping photos of the event no one asked me to document, like an unpaid employee of my own family. In the days that followed, I kept working at the bookstore, kept attending my art classes, kept submitting portfolios to design competitions around the city. That summer, I poured myself into an art project about Austin's local history, hoping to have it exhibited at the city's art museum gallery. And miraculously, it happened. I received an acceptance letter. My project would be showcased for 3 months in the fall. I had dreamed of that moment through countless nights, dreamed of Dad visiting the gallery, standing before my large canvas with pride in his eyes, dreamed of him introducing me to others, saying, "This is my daughter, she did this." But when I brought the letter home, Dad barely glanced up from Mason's financial report. "A local exhibition, huh? Nothing to make a fuss about, Harper. Focus on getting a stable job instead." I stared at him, searching for a flicker of emotion in those cold gray eyes. But there was nothing, only that suffocating indifference. That evening, when Mason brought his new girlfriend home for dinner, the house was once again filled with cheerful chatter. Dad poured wine, laughing and making conversation, as if the exhibition letter I had shown him hours earlier never existed. I sat at the corner of the dining table, wearing the white dress I had carefully chosen for what was supposed to be a special day. But tonight, it felt utterly out of place. I listened as they spoke of Mason's promising future, of Carter's shot at going pro. No one asked when my exhibition would open. No one asked what my painting meant. And it was in that moment I realized maybe I would never get from them what I wanted. No matter how much I achieved, my efforts would always be trampled under the shadow of my brothers. But there was something Dad didn't know. My silence wasn't surrender. That night, while they continued chatting about Mason and Carter, I quietly went upstairs, closing the door firmly behind me. The small room, crowded with unfinished sketches, felt more suffocating than ever. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the painting I had just finished for the exhibition. An image of Austin's old alleys, where everyday stories hid beneath layers of nostalgic colors. But tonight, it wasn't just a painting. It was a reminder that I had already done more than enough. For the first time, I admitted a bitter truth to myself. There would never be a day when Dad looked at me with pride. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because, in his world, I was never meant to exist as something to be proud of. And strangely, realizing that didn't hurt anymore. There was only an odd lightness, and within it something new was quietly taking shape. A resolve, a goal detached from him now, belonging entirely to me. I would draw, I would create. Not for Dad's approval, but to stand tall in a world that had always wanted me to keep my head down. The following week, I accepted an internship offer at a small design studio in downtown Austin. Low pay, long hours, but I didn't hesitate. It was the first time I truly stepped out of my family's shadow, into a place where no one knew me as Mason's little sister or Douglas Evans' daughter. There, I was just Harper. And that was enough. I started with the tasks no one wanted: fixing file errors, making coffee, building color palettes for picky clients. Some nights, I stayed at the studio until 2 a.m., quietly adjusting tiny details on a design draft, only to hear my boss glance at it and say, "Good, keep going." But unlike my father, the indifference in this environment actually fueled me, because here, results are the only language that matters. No golden suns, no invisible favoritism, just whether you can deliver or not. That pressure forged a habit in me. Never quit. No one would comfort you when you're exhausted. No one would cheer when you do well. But if you fall, the world will keep moving without even glancing back. And I swore I wouldn't fall. I poured every penny from my bookstore job, plus the meager paycheck from the studio, into buying a used laptop and upgrading my design software. On weekends, while friends went out or gathered with family, I sat alone in a small cafe by the Colorado River, sketching concept drafts for personal projects. I built a simple website, uploading my work, adding blog posts about art and the stories behind each piece. I didn't wait for someone to discover me. I made myself worth discovering. That November, an article about my community art project unexpectedly featured in the Austin Chronicle's Silent Young Talent section. They called me the silent designer. I didn't tell my family. There was no reason to. That article wasn't for their pride. It was for me. To know I was on the right path. Winter came. While Mason continued being praised at business mixers and Carter busied himself with sponsorship deals, I quietly signed a branding contract for a rising cafe in the Domain District. It wasn't $1 million project, but seeing the logo I designed printed on every menu and coffee cup, right there, I understood what real value felt like. No flashy stage, no father's approval, just the simple truth: I was doing good work and I knew it. From that moment, every lingering sadness I had carried turned into burning motivation. Every time Dad boasted about Mason or Carter at family gatherings, I would smile. A different kind of smile. No more waiting, no more resentment. Because now I knew. The day I shine won't be the day they clap for me. It will be the day they're simply unable to ignore me. To most people, starting a business conjures images of flashy presentations, investors shaking hands under bright lights. But for me, Harper Evans, it started with a makeshift desk in a rundown apartment on the outskirts of Austin, Texas. No capital, no team. Just me, a used laptop, and a head full of ideas that kept me awake every night. I decided to create a branding design studio for small businesses. Not because it was an easy market, quite the opposite. I knew I'd be competing with countless big-budget agencies. But that's exactly why I chose to start with people like me, the ones starting from nothing, needing a hand to pull them out of the same shadows I once lived in. I named the studio Inkspire, a blend of ink and inspire. Simple, but for me, it was a declaration. I wanted to use my art to tell stories for those who'd been overlooked. But noble ideals don't pay rent. The first 3 months were harsher than anything I'd imagined. Every morning at 5 a.m., I'd design flyers and cheap banners for small diners in the East Side. At night, I freelanced online for barely enough to buy another cheap bag of coffee. No applause, no encouragement. And of course, my family never once asked about that art job that won't lead anywhere. Whenever exhaustion hit me, I'd remember Dad's words, "Don't dream too big, Harper." Strangely enough, that disdain became the very fuel that kept me moving. I taught myself 3D design, video editing, and digital brand optimization. With no mentor, I became my own teacher. I failed constantly, revised endlessly, but I gritted my teeth and kept going. Many nights, while the entire city slept, I sat hunched over my screen, eyes burning from coding website interfaces. There were times I thought I'd break. But oddly, the loneliness only made me stronger. Then, a small opportunity appeared. A newly opened bakery called Clover and Crust was looking for someone to design their entire brand identity. Their budget was modest, but they believed in people who were also starting from zero. I sent them a concept, crafted with every ounce of my passion. Thankfully, they chose Inkspire. That project wasn't just my first real order. It was a turning point. I spent 2 weeks surveying, talking with every bakery staff, understanding their story. I didn't sell them a logo. I told their story through colors, fonts, every tiny detail on their packaging. On the grand opening day, seeing customers take photos with the sign I designed, I stood quietly on the street corner, feeling my spine straighten for the first time. Dad wasn't there. Neither was anyone from my family. But for the first time, I didn't need them. That small success opened other doors. Willow Brew Cafe reached out. Then came Ember Glow, a boutique candle shop. None of them were industry giants. But they chose me because they knew I understood what it felt like to be overlooked. I didn't become rich overnight. Payments were still late, bills still piled up. But bit by bit, Inkspire began to find its place. I rented a small office on the second floor of an old building where the window overlooked a tree-lined street. The desk was simple, but stacked with fresh designs, each one like a small brick building, the future I was crafting with my own hands. Every morning, stepping into that room, I reminded myself, this is where I start. Not to earn someone's approval, but to prove that I don't need to live in anyone's shadow. And I knew the tough days ahead would be long. But this time, I'd walk with a different posture. After over a year of persistence with Inkspire, I realized something. Real success doesn't make noise. It doesn't arrive with roaring applause or grand speeches. It's quiet, but steady, like a drop of water patiently carving through stone. Starting with small, local contracts, Inkspire had become a name sought out by small and medium businesses in Austin. From cafes, bakeries, to rising tech startups, they chose me not for a flashy budget, but because they saw someone who had walked the same path from zero. Inkspire's first team had only 3 people. Ethan, a graphic freelancer once let go for being too creative for minor projects. Chloe, a senior marketing student rejected for lack of real-world experience. And me, the girl tired of waiting for a nod from her family. We worked in a rented office on the 3rd floor of an old building on Guadalupe Street. Low-ceilinged, dusty glass windows. But for me, it was the first base I truly owned. Every morning I walked into that office with a different mindset, not the girl shrinking at the table anymore while Dad boasted about Mason and Carter. Now, I was the one running a growing business, making decisions, steering my own dream. We worked like people racing against stolen time, Mornings brainstorming at cafes, nights editing pixels for demanding clients. Ethan often joked, "At Inkspire, deadlines are our religion and coffee is our lifeblood." Success started knocking in the quietest ways. A brand identity project for the Bloom and Thorn flower shop chain went viral on social media, bringing in waves of new contracts. Then came the branding for Austin Food Fest 2023. And suddenly, everything changed. Small investors reached out. They weren't throwing money at fantasies. They saw real value in what Inkspire was doing, helping small brands tell their stories. And we were the ones to do it. But with my family, nothing had changed. Dad still proudly flaunted Mason, now Director of Strategic Development at a tech firm. Carter remained the sports golden boy, recently signing as a brand ambassador for a major athletic brand. And Harper? That name never once came up at family dinners. Yet the bitterness had faded. In fact, their silence gave me a precious gift. No expectations, no pressure, no judgmental eyes. Quietly, I kept building Inkspire. The worn office on Guadalupe was replaced by a bright modern workspace in South Congress. For the first time, I signed a lease under my own name. No guarantor needed. I spoke at business panels as a guest speaker, sharing how to build a brand from humble beginnings. Without anyone's backing, I confidently stood before hundreds, telling my story. A story built not under spotlights but through sweat and countless sleepless nights. One day, after a conference, I ran into Mason in the lobby. He was with a group of partners, looking polished and confident, as always. We locked eyes for a brief second. He gave a faint, polite nod. I looked him straight in the eye and smiled. A calm, knowing smile. Enough for him to understand that everything had changed. I didn't need them to acknowledge it right away, because I knew the right moment would come. And my silence wasn't submission anymore. It was preparation for the final reckoning. For the past 2 years, the name Harper Evans hadn't been mentioned at our family dinners, but that didn't mean I had disappeared. I'd just been busy, preparing for my grand return. When Inkspire officially secured a partnership with Artisan Fresh, a supermarket chain expanding nationwide, I knew the timing was right. No longer confined to small local projects, Inkspire was now ready to compete with major players on the U.S. branding map. And that's when another opportunity surfaced. Orion Ventures, the financial firm where my father, Douglas Evans, had served as vice president for over a decade, was seeking a partner for a full brand overhaul after a series of PR scandals. They needed someone fresh, capable of reviving their image. Among the nominated firms, Inkspire's name came up, recommended by the very small businesses my father once dismissed. The irony? Orion had no idea who was behind Inkspire. I sat in that glass-walled meeting room downtown, facing familiar faces from my father's office portraits. They negotiated, discussed, and ultimately signed the partnership deal with Inkspire, purely based on merit, unaware that the doodling little girl was about to hold the keys to their brand's future. I signed that contract under my new legal name, Harper Lane. I had changed my last name 6 months ago, a decision no one knew about, and frankly, no one cared. But then, I was the one who sent a single, cold message into our long-dead family group chat. "I'll be attending this year's Father's Day dinner." That was it. No question mark, no emojis. My mother, Lorraine, replied quickly with a weak smile emoji, trying to appear cheerful. "Mason and Carter?" Silence, as if my presence was still just a shadow not worth acknowledging. What they didn't know was that this time, that shadow had form, weight, and enough substance to shake the very ground they stood on. A week before the Father's Day dinner, I walked into the Lucent dealership showroom and signed for a graphite gray coupe, the exact model my father once admired but always brushed off with financial practicality excuses. I paid in full. No bank loans, no co-signers. My money, from the contracts they never bothered to notice. On the passenger seat of that brand new car was a thin but heavy stack of papers, the contract transferring brand control of Orion Ventures to Inkspire. A meticulously drafted agreement, giving Inkspire full authority to restructure Orion's brand image, with that control resting solely in my hands. For years, they were used to seeing Harper as the forgotten name at the dinner table. I wanted to see their faces when they realized the not-good-enough daughter was about to hold the fate of the company they proudly flaunted. That day, I chose a simple yet sharp ivory suit. I didn't need Mason's flashy designer labels, nor Carter's polished athlete look. What I needed was confidence, from myself. Something they had never taught me how to have in over 20 years. The coupe glided smoothly down familiar Austin streets, its engine purring beneath my foot like a quiet reminder. It's time to end this tired old play. As I parked in front of the Evans estate, the first eyes to catch mine were my father's. A subtle furrow of his brow as he recognized the car, a flash of confusion as he struggled to place my face with the poised figure he hadn't expected to see. Mason stepped out onto the porch, wearing his usual smug grin. Carter fiddled with his shirt collar, not even bothering to look up. I stepped out of the car, a light breeze brushing past the neatly tied bun at my nape. I didn't greet loudly, didn't force a smile. I simply walked into the courtyard, the place that never had space for me, with the stride of someone who now knew they belonged more than anyone else. In my hand was a slim folder, secured in black leather. I looked at my father and smiled. "Dad, this year I brought you a special Father's Day gift." His smile faltered for a split second. I saw the flicker of doubt and irritation behind his eyes. But I stayed silent, because tonight, that silence would be my sharpest weapon. Inside the Evans estate, the scene was painfully familiar. Warm yellow lights, a long table draped in white linen, crystal glasses glinting under candlelight. The same old stories were being recycled, the same fake laughter circling the room. As if I had never left. Mason, clad in his navy blazer, was proudly boasting about his latest collaboration with a real estate investment firm in Dallas. Carter eagerly chimed in about his new endorsement deal with a sports brand, with my mother Lorraine offering polite, dutiful praise, though her eyes occasionally softened when they flickered toward me. And my father, Douglas Evans, sat at the head of the table, basking in his role as king of this tiny empire. He nodded, raised his glass, each gesture a reminder of the years he had trampled over my existence. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, the black leather folder resting on my lap. Every glance that passed over me treated me as if I were just an empty chair filling a spot. When Carter finished bragging about his statewide marketing campaign, my father lifted his glass again, eyes gleaming with near-arrogant pride. My two sons know how to hold their heads high in life. One elevating the Evans family in the investment world, the other, the face of Texas sports. Truly a blessing. Then he paused. I knew what was coming next, right on cue. And then he glanced at me, lips curling into a dismissive smirk. And as for the failure over there, no need to mention. Probably still busy drawing logos for some corner bakery, right, Harper? Mason let out a sharp laugh. Carter tapped the table, nodding as if he'd just witnessed premium entertainment. Kind of sad, really, Mason added, voice laced with mock pity. But not everyone's cut out to be a leader, right, Dad? I heard every word, each syllable like an old knife they had sharpened once more, slicing deeper into my pride. But this time, the difference was, I didn't feel hurt. I was just waiting for them to fully expose their blind arrogance before I dropped the final curtain. As the laughter died down, I placed my glass on the table. The soft clink echoed like a period, ending the farce. Oh, fitting, I said slowly. No need to raise my voice, yet enough to command attention. Today really is a perfect day to talk about success. The room fell silent. I have a little story to share too, if you'll allow me, Dad. Douglas narrowed his eyes, waving a dismissive hand. If it's about your little design projects, Harper, let's not waste dinner time. We're discussing bigger things here. I smiled. Then let me keep it brief. Calmly, I opened the black leather folder on my lap, pulling out a document printed on fine stock paper. Orion Ventures just finalized a brand restructuring contract with Inkspire. You all know Inkspire, right? No answer. Of course they didn't. My company. That so-called failure. Dad. I stood, walked to the center of the table, and placed the contract right in front of Douglas. His face darkened. His hand, still holding a wineglass, trembled slightly. This is the agreement confirming Inkspire will take full control of Orion Ventures' brand image for the next 5 years, including approval over all media campaigns, public relations strategies, and senior leadership representation. I paused, locking eyes with him. In other words, Dad, starting today, anyone wanting to use the Orion name in press, media, or any public materials will need my signature first. Mason's brow furrowed. Carter leaned back, his face visibly paling. Douglas Evans stayed silent, his gaze fixed on the document like it was a death sentence for the pride he had so carefully built. Is this a joke? Mason growled, but the shake in his voice betrayed him. I shook my head, slowly. No, Mason. This is reality. As real as every time Dad dismissed my efforts, every time he said, not worth mentioning when it came to me. Today, I'm simply giving you all a different reality. The reality where I now control the very brand Dad's career is tied to. I closed the folder, turned toward the door. Happy Father's Day, Dad. From now on, every time you want to be in the media, remember, I'll be the one approving that photo first. I left the table, their stunned faces frozen behind me, and as the door to the Evans estate shut quietly behind me, I knew they'd never be able to ignore me again. I had thought that just the Orion Ventures restructuring contract would be enough to wake the family up. It was wrong. Douglas Evans was still Douglas Evans. He sat in silence, staring at the paper, his face rigid, as if his pride was clinging to its last breath. Mason forced a chuckle, shaking his head. It's just a branding contract, Harper. Don't think that means you belong at this table with us. I said nothing. Instead, I unlocked my phone and sent a brief message. 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang. It was Jonathan Price, legal director of Evercrest Holdings, the firm that had just finalized the acquisition of 68% of Orion Ventures barely a week ago. A deal, of course, my father and family had no clue Inkspire had orchestrated behind the scenes. Jonathan placed a thick envelope in front of Douglas, a professional glint of satisfaction in his eyes. Mr. Evans, I believe you'll want to review these documents. Evercrest Holdings has officially completed the acquisition of a controlling stake in Orion Ventures. One key condition of the deal is the transfer of executive authority to the strategic partner who rebuilt Orion's brand value over the past 6 months. He paused, turned to me, smiling knowingly. And that partner, of course, is Ms. Harper Lane. The air grew heavy. Douglas slumped back into his chair, pale, his hands trembling as they clenched the envelope. Mason opened his mouth to object, but Jonathan continued smoothly. For clarity, as of today, all decisions concerning Orion Ventures will be finalized by acting CEO Ms. Harper Lane. Mr. Evans will transition to an honorary advisory role, with no executive authority. Carter leaned back, exhaling sharply in frustration. I stepped forward, unhurried. To put it simply, starting today, I'm your boss, Douglas, and I'll be deciding exactly how you appear in the financial world from here on out. He looked up at me, and for the first time that gaze was stripped bare. No arrogance, no dismissal. Just a man watching his carefully built empire crumble. But the finale wasn't over yet. I pulled another document from my bag. A copy of the personal property ownership transfer. Oh, and one more thing. The Evans estate. Funny enough, do you know who the current legal owner is, Dad? Douglas froze. You mortgaged it to cover Orion's losses last year, and when Orion became part of Evercrest, the collateral came with the deal. In other words, this house now belongs to Inkspire. I emphasized each word. And Inkspire belongs to me. The tension was suffocating. Mason's grip on his glass whitened his knuckles. Carter stared down at his cold, untouched plate. My mother, Lorraine, sat motionless, her hands trembling slightly, eyes glistening with words left unsaid. I stood tall, arms crossed, eyes locked on Douglas. I don't need your approval anymore, Dad, because you no longer have the power to give it. Now, you're the one who'll need permission to exist in my world. But don't worry, I won't throw you out of this house. Evans is a name I've left behind, but this place is still the home where I grew up. It doesn't need to be tied to your cruelty to keep standing. Douglas slumped back in his chair, eyes half closed, like a cracked statue finally crumbling. I turned and walked away from the dining room, each step deliberate, unhurried. The door of the mansion closed behind me, not as a barrier between childhood naivety and indifference, but as the final period to the chapter where I once bowed my head, begging for approval. I didn't need their applause for my victory. From the girl cast aside in the family's narrative, I had rewritten the ending. With my own hands. The daughter once labeled the failure, now owned everything they thought I'd never reach. After the door shut behind me, the Evans family's mask finally began to crack. The man who once sat at the head of the table like an immovable rock, his head held high as if all of Austin owed him reverence, was now trembling. His hands, once firm in signing multi-million-dollar deals, now shook as they gripped the stack of papers, weighed down by the very pride he had carried his whole life. No one knew what to say. Mason sat frozen. The eldest brother, the one who once scoffed that I only designed bakery logos, now stared into empty space, as if the world he knew had been ripped apart. Carter, always the liveliest, now sat with his head bowed, fingers nervously twisting a crumpled napkin. My father still hadn't looked up. He was rereading every word of that contract, as if doing so could somehow rewrite reality. But the truth didn't care. Is it really her? His voice cracked, breaking. The one I've... He stopped, swallowing hard. The silver strands in his hair glistened under the soft lights, exposing the age he had long refused to acknowledge. She's not a failure, he finally muttered, eyes locked on my signature at the bottom of the page. She's everything. No one argued. Mason clenched his fists, the soft crack of his knuckles filling the suffocating silence. He shot up from his seat, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. What is this? She can't. Mason looked around, desperate for agreement. She can't go from the failure to controlling Orion Ventures in just 2 years. It's impossible. Carter lifted his head, but his usual superiority was gone. But it happened, Mason. That paper doesn't lie. She did it. Douglas closed his eyes. Everything he had built, the Evans legacy, his vice president title at Orion, was now just a hollow shell beneath his youngest daughter's hand. The daughter he never believed was good enough to stand beside her brothers. He had never imagined this scenario. In his mind, Harper would always be the girl who doodled, a quiet shadow at family dinners. But when he opened his eyes, reality was brutal. That very shadow had flipped the table he once ruled. I should have seen it sooner, Douglas said hoarsely. The way she stayed silent, it was how she prepared her strike. Mason gritted his teeth, his voice sharp with disbelief. I don't get it. How did we let this happen? How could she... For the first time, my mother spoke. Her voice was soft but unwavering. Because she did what you two never would. She listened, she learned, she was patient, not to earn your father's praise, but to stand on her own feet. She didn't look at anyone, quietly clearing the untouched, now cold dishes from the table. Douglas slowly rose to his feet, His eyes, once clouded with arrogance, now held only stark clarity. He knew, the moment he uttered "the failure doesn't count," tonight was the last time he would ever believe he controlled this family. "She's won," he repeated, not in resignation, but in a painful acceptance. "But the worst part isn't that she won. It's that we let her grow up under so much disregard. We never saw her surpass us until it was too late." The room fell into a heavy silence. No one dared say the word failure again. No one dared laugh. Mason slumped back into his chair. Carter remained silent. My mother continued stacking dishes as if the dinner had merely left a stain to be wiped away, not the ruins of a shattered dynasty. But deep down, they all knew. That night, the Evans family lost the invisible power they once believed would last forever. I walked out of the Evans mansion into an eerily quiet evening. No one called after me. No one tried to stop me. Only the sound of my heels echoed, striking the stone pavement with steady rhythm across the vast courtyard that used to make me feel so small. The Lucent coupe sat neatly under the driveway lights. I opened the door, and the dashboard greeted me with a familiar message. "Welcome back, Miss Lane." I smiled. It took me nearly 30 years to learn a simple truth. Recognition is not something you beg from others. It's something you create for yourself. My family, with all their polished facades, may have never truly cherished me. But from tonight on, they would never be able to ignore me again. I glanced at the mansion one last time through the rearview mirror. That place had once been the cradle of my father's pride, the stage where Mason and Carter basked under his admiring gaze. And I had always been the quiet shadow standing in the wings. They had grown far too comfortable not seeing me. But tonight, I had stepped onto that very stage, illuminated by the light of my own making. Not the spotlight they reserved for others. And they, the ones who once dismissed me, had been forced to bow to that truth. I didn't do it for revenge, not to watch them crumble. I did it for myself. For the 12-year-old girl who once stood in the living room, clutching a city art competition certificate, waiting in vain for a single word of praise from her father. For those evenings, cleaning floors at the bookstore, saving every dime for art classes, while Mason dined at fine restaurants and Carter graced local news headlines, where the nights hunched over an old desk, eyes bloodshot from exhaustion, painstakingly refining every design detail, only to be dismissed as useless the next day. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. A message from Chloe, my trusted partner at Inkspire. "Artisan Fresh just opened their first store in New York. They want you to be the creative director for the entire brand system." I smiled. I didn't need a loud family dinner to validate my worth. Every small client, every project I poured my heart into, was the clearest validation I could ever need. The car turned onto Barton Springs Road, city lights reflecting off the windshield like soft trails of stars. The feeling was different, light but profound. As if, for the first time in all these years, I was truly breathing air that was mine. On the way home, I remembered a quote I once read while working at the bookstore. "True strength is living without needing applause. I am the one who saved my own life." And to me, that is the greatest victory. Harper's story proves that self-worth doesn't come from others' recognition, especially from those who once looked down on you. Silence, persistence, and unwavering resolve are the sharpest weapons to conquer success. In real life, we all crave to be seen. But only when we learn to stand tall and create our own value do we become truly free. Harper didn't need her family's applause because she answered the question, "Who am I?" through her own grit and achievements. What do you think about Harper's journey in the downfall of those hollow family idols? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more meaningful, emotional stories about family and life.